by his most faithful, who remain hell-bent on believing the 2020 election was stolen from them, which should raise concerns given Trump's influence over the GOP has all but withered since voters threw him out of office in 2020. Helping us kick off this hour, Huffington Post senior justice reporter Ryan Riley, MSNBC terrorist analyst Malcolm Nance, and MSNBC legal analyst and former U.S. attorney Barbara McCade, who also hosts #SistersInLaw. Thank you so much for joining me. I want to start with you, Barbara. What do we expect from tomorrow's deposition by New York to the former president?
Well, what's always difficult with Donald Trump is you never know what words are going to come out of his mouth. So he's been through this process many times in his prior life as a businessman. He'll be asked questions, but he's under oath. And I think there's a good reason that his lawyers in the Mueller investigation insisted on written questions. And that is, he is so unfamiliar with the truth that it's very difficult, I think, for him to tell it in a consistent manner. So I think anything could happen in that deposition.
Can we read the tea leaves at all on what may happen if he is subpoenaed by the commission, for the January 6th commission?
Yeah, I think that there's a likelihood that he could have to testify in person. It seems like in the past there have always been courtesies extended to presidents and former presidents. You know, Bill Clinton got to do his deposition for his testimony for grand jury in private, in video, not in the open. But I think Donald Trump has shown such a flagrant abuse of the process that calling him before the committee and forcing him to testify might be the only way that we can get to the bottom of what was on his mind on January 6th.
So, Malcolm, I want to bring you into the conversation. Just a few days ago, we saw Trumpism on full display in an event for the Virginia governor's race. And, quote, this is basically the GOP governor candidate basically says, I want to invite Kim from Chesapeake. She's carrying an American flag that was carried at the peaceful rally with Donald J. Trump on January 6th. I ask you all to rise and join us as Mark Lloyd leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Can you speak to that absurdity?
Well, it's truly absurd because what we've seen now is items that were carried in the insurrection, which was used as an event to topple the United States government, are having a talismanic effect. You know, they're essentially carrying them as these relics, as if it's going to give them some connection deeper to Donald Trump. And, of course, the fact that they tried to overthrow government. And it all flies in the face of their own storyline, their story arc, in which it was Antifa and Black Lives Matter that carried out the attack. But now on some sides, you see them actually not only recognizing that they've carried out this event, but as I said in the video, a peaceful protest at the Capitol and now carrying an American flag, which took part in that. It's absolutely disgraceful that any of this is happening. But what you're seeing is a strategy by the Republicans and Trump play out where they are now embracing the popularism of that violence.
So, Ryan, I want to turn to you. You wrote an article for the Huffington Post, and you cited an FBI interview showing the defendant admit he became radicalized watching videos on InfoWars and from conservative commentators that convinced him that Trump had won the election. How are Trump's own words right now being used to basically bring people back? Are people believing it, or are they actually saying, wait a second, I have a wake-up call, this was completely fabricated, that there was no big lie, there was no steal?
Yeah, it's fascinating because DJ Rodriguez in this interview right after he was arrested back in March, basically, spilled his guts to the FBI and explained exactly how he got to the place where he was. The FBI asked, how does this guy who goes from saying he's supporting the police and standing up to Antifa go to then tasering a D.C. police officer a photo of who you just showed on the screen a few moments ago, Mike Fanone, in the neck during the Capitol insurrection. And, he basically explained that he really thought the election was stolen. And it makes sense, that so many people who actually thought the election were stolen are proud of their actions that day, because that's the logic that you would follow. If there was actually this massive criminal conspiracy, and this was 1776 2.0, you're going to do something about it. So it's not something that, you think people would be necessarily ashamed of. But what we're seeing now is that because Trump continues to spout this rhetoric, it's having an impact on ongoing cases. And actually, in many cases, judges are weighing that rhetoric into their decisions on whether or not to keep people incarcerated pre-trial because they're worried about sort of the rhetoric that Trump is putting out there and continuing to say that the election was stolen, continuing to lie about this supposed criminal conspiracy. And it really does have this impact. And it's something, I spoke with people immediately after the election who were very worried about the potential impact that this would have. And now, when you have this much of America radicalized, it really is this ongoing threat that I think law enforcement really needs to worry about going forward.
Well, and one of the things that we found surprising as things start getting more unveiled is the role that people within the Justice Department, Barbara, had. I'm speaking specifically of Jeffrey Clark's role. He basically was willing, it seemed like, to throw the election in favor of Trump. Will he get subpoenaed? If so, what can we expect from his testimony?
Yes, the committee is going to want to hear from Jeffrey Clark. What he was plotting with President Trump is so outside the lane of what the Justice Department normally does and is supposed to do. He was threatened to take over as the acting attorney general at one point. And what he wanted to do was send a letter to all the swing states suggesting to them that they could vacate their elections and have the Republican-controlled legislatures select their electors instead. Basically a roadmap for overturning the election. Even if this were somehow legitimate, that is so far outside the lane of what the Justice Department is supposed to do. And so I think not only is the committee going to want to know what was he thinking, what was he up to, but who put him up to it? He had private meetings with Donald Trump. And so I think that the substance of those meetings is critically important to understanding what happened that day and the role of Donald Trump in all of this insurrection activity.
Barbara, for the viewers watching, is it unusual for someone of his rank inside the Justice Department to have that type of conversation in private with the president?
It is. DOJ policies make it very clear that they want to shelter lower-level employees, meaning below the level of the attorney general and the deputy, those two top positions, from White House communications. And the goal there is to avoid any impropriety of communications about specific cases or even the appearance of impropriety, because there should never be partisan politics controlling a decision of the Justice Department. It should be based on facts and law. And so just by having that private meeting with Donald Trump, Jeffrey Clark ran way afoul of these rules. It's not a little thing. It's a big thing in the Justice Department. Everybody knows it, and somebody at his level absolutely knew it. He knew what he was doing was highly improper, and that's also what makes it feel so nefarious that he had this meeting.
So, Malcolm and Nance, you are an expert in Russian propaganda and what they do to basically turn people on its head and basically create walls of where there's truth and there's not. A lot of what we're seeing here in this commission, a lot of this nefarious activity that seems to be coming from within an institution, outside players, being spun and not knowing what the truth and what isn't. What kind of playbook do you feel that the Trump's people and the Trump himself may have taken straight out of the Kremlin?
Well, it's interesting because the Russians developed an information warfare strategy back in the early 2000s that was developed by the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, and it's known as the Gerasimov Doctrine. The Gerasimov Doctrine is an information warfare strategy in which they infiltrate and project so much propaganda into a foreign population that population, according to the Russians' own studies, would welcome an invasion without a shot being fired. That didn't really happen. What the Russians did in the year 2016 is that they created an information bubble in which the Trump campaign was seen as friendly, and then the Trump data team took that information, including stolen information from the Democratic National Committee, and created their own information sphere. Once the Russian bubble was popped, after the 2016 election, the Trump team took the ball and ran with it. The Russians barely have to do anything. The Trump team created lies. The Trump team created propaganda and indoctrinated their own followers into believing some of the most insane lies in the history of the United States, to the point where they view it, and you were talking about radicalization. They view their acts as not only patriotic, but that violence is the only solution, and that they're carrying out a second Lexington, a second Concord. As he said, as your other guest said, 1776 2.0. They think that they are restoring the United States, despite the fact that they are physically attacking the United States. And believe me, the way that ammunition prices went up in the last year on the public market, I think these people really believe that they're going to effect a revolution at some point.